Victor Camargo stood in the marble hallway of the Chicago private school he had quietly funded, his designer Italian shoes clicking against the polished floors. At 56, he had everything money could buy: a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, a fleet of vintage cars, investments spanning 3 continents. Yet as he walked through these halls, his heart felt hollow, carved out by a pain no fortune could heal. The afternoon sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns on the walls, when suddenly a voice stopped him cold. A soft, lilting melody drifted from a nearby classroom, a lullaby he hadn't heard in 20 years. His breath caught, his chest tightened, and his hands began to tremble as the familiar tune wrapped around his soul like a ghost's embrace. The world tilted beneath his feet as memories crashed over him like a devastating wave. Victor's daughter, Clara, had vanished at age 6 during a family picnic on their Long Island estate. One moment she was chasing butterflies among the lilies, her golden curls bouncing in the summer breeze. The next, she had disappeared without a trace. The police searched for months. Private investigators followed leads that led nowhere. Psychics made promises they couldn't keep. But nothing could bring back his little girl who used to sing this very lullaby before bed, the one they had created together during quiet bedtime stories. Now, hearing it again felt like being struck by lightning, setting every nerve ending ablaze with impossible hope and paralyzing fear. Standing frozen in the doorway, Victor watched a young woman with gentle features and tired eyes sit on the edge of a table, singing to a group of children preparing for nap time. Her voice carried the same tender quality he remembered, and her eyes held a distant look, as if she was singing not to the children before her, but to memories locked away in her heart. The woman's chestnut hair caught the afternoon light, and when she turned her head, Victor saw something that made his knees weak. The curve of her chin, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, were mirrors of his late wife's expressions. The children dozed off one by one, but Victor couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process what his eyes were telling him as the impossible possibility began to take root in his mind. When the last note faded and the children settled into peaceful sleep, the woman looked up and met Victor's intense stare. Her eyes widened in surprise and concern. "I'm sorry," she said softly, her voice carrying a slight nervousness. "Was I too loud?" Victor stepped into the room, his legs moving independently of his stunned mind. His voice came out as barely a whisper. "That song, where did you learn it?" The woman blinked, clearly confused by the stranger's emotional state. "I've known it for as long as I can remember. My mother used to hum it before bed, but she passed when I was very young." Victor felt his heart stop. "What was her name?" "Marina," she replied hesitantly, then added, "But I was raised in foster care. I don't know anything else about her." But this couldn't be happening. This was impossible. After 2 decades of searching, how could his daughter be standing right here singing their song? Victor's world spun as he gripped the back of a child's chair for support. "What's your name?" he asked, though he was terrified of the answer. "Clara," she said simply. The name hit him like a physical blow. His legs gave out completely, and he collapsed onto one of the tiny chairs, shaking uncontrollably. Tears filled his eyes as 20 years of grief threatened to pour out at once. "That's impossible," he whispered. "That's my daughter's name." Clara stepped back, clearly alarmed by this stranger's breakdown. "Sir, maybe you should sit down properly. You don't look well." "I am sitting," he said, his voice somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "Clara was my daughter. She disappeared 20 years ago when she was 6 years old, and that song was ours. We created it together. No one else in the world could know that melody." Clara stared at him, the color draining from her face as the weight of his words began to sink in. "I need to know more," Victor said, standing now with desperate urgency. "Please, you have to tell me. Where were you found? Who raised you? What do you remember?" Clara's hands shook as she processed the magnitude of what this man was suggesting. I was abandoned at a roadside shelter in Indiana. Around 1984, I was about 6 years old. No identification, no memories of anything before that, just this song. It's been with me my whole life, the only connection I had to whatever came before. Victor felt something deep inside him crack open like a dam about to burst. After all, the dead ends, false hopes and shattered leads, could this really be happening? As Clara gathered her belongings with trembling hands, Victor watched every gesture, every expression, looking for signs he both desperately hoped for and feared to find. The afternoon light had faded, and the school was emptying, but neither of them noticed anything beyond the invisible thread connecting them across 2 decades of separation. Have you ever experienced the moment when your entire world shifts on its axis, when everything you thought you knew suddenly becomes questionable? Share your thoughts in the comments below. That evening, Victor sat in his penthouse office, staring at Lake Michigan's dark waters as he dialed his private investigator, the same man who had never given up searching for Clara. "Michael," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to investigate a teacher named Clara. She knows the song. She was abandoned at 6 years old. She could be—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I understand, Victor. I'll start immediately." After hanging up, Victor paced the marble floors of his empty mansion, past photographs of Clara at various ages, pictures from birthdays she'd never celebrated with him, holidays she'd never shared, achievements he'd never witnessed. Each day that followed felt like an eternity as he waited for news while trying to process the possibility that his greatest loss might become his greatest miracle. Meanwhile, Clara returned to her modest apartment in Wicker Park, surrounded by plants she tended like the children in her classroom. She couldn't shake the encounter with the mysterious millionaire. Standing before her bathroom mirror, she studied her reflection with new intensity, searching for clues in features she'd always taken for granted. The photograph tucked in her bedside table, the only one she had from her early years in foster care, seemed to hold secrets she'd never noticed before. Sleep eluded her as questions multiplied. Who had she been before that roadside shelter? Why did this stranger's pain feel so familiar? And why did the name Camargo resonate in her heart like a chord she'd always known but never played? Victor couldn't stay away. 3 days later, he returned to the school under the pretense of donating classroom materials. Clara was reading to her students, and he found himself studying every detail. The way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when concentrating, how she used her hands to emphasize parts of the story, the patient way she answered every question. These were gestures he remembered from his late wife, movements that seemed encoded in DNA rather than learned. As she read about a little girl finding her way home, Victor had to excuse himself to the hallway, overwhelmed by the parallel. When Clara found him there, leaning against the wall with tears in his eyes, she didn't ask questions. Instead, she simply handed him a tissue and said, "Some stories hit harder than others." In that moment of unexpected kindness, Victor saw not just his daughter, but the remarkable woman she had become. The call came on a Friday afternoon. "Mr. Camargo," Michael's voice was breathless with excitement. "We have matches. Everything matches. DNA comparison with samples from Clara's childhood items in your home. They're identical. But there's more. The nanny who disappeared the day Clara vanished. We found her. She's in a care facility in Detroit, suffering from dementia, but in moments of clarity," she confessed. "She was paid by your business rival, Richard Thornton, to take Clara during the picnic confusion. She was supposed to deliver her unharmed to Thornton's people for leverage in the company merger. But she panicked, kept Clara for weeks, then abandoned her at that shelter when the heat got too intense." Victor's phone slipped from his hands. As he collapsed into his chair, 20 years of questions finally answered in the cruelest of ways. But confronting Clara with this truth seemed impossible. How do you tell someone that their entire life has been built on a foundation of lies and stolen years? Victor spent days crafting and discarding speeches, practicing conversations that felt too monumental for mere words. Finally, he gathered the courage to invite her to dinner at his penthouse. Clara hesitated. She barely knew this man, but something in his eyes, a desperate hope mixed with profound sadness, convinced her to accept. On that pivotal evening, as city lights twinkled below them and the Chicago skyline painted a backdrop of dreams and possibilities, Victor set down a leather folder between them on the mahogany dining table. "Clara," he said, his voice steady, despite his racing heart, "there's something I must tell you, something that will change everything you know about yourself." With shaking hands, Clara opened the folder to find DNA test results, hospital records from her birth, police reports from her disappearance, and photographs, so many photographs of a little girl who looked exactly like her in situations she should remember but couldn't. The room fell silent except for the soft rustle of papers and her increasingly rapid breathing. Victor watched her face transform as understanding dawned, confusion melting into shock, then to something that might have been recognition. "You are Clara Camargo," he said gently, tears flowing freely now. "You are my daughter. The daughter I've spent 20 years searching for." Clara stared at the evidence of her true identity, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. The lullaby suddenly made sense, not as a comfort from an unknown mother, but as a creation shared with a father who had never stopped loving her. "I don't know how to feel," Clara whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I've lived my whole life wondering who I was, where I came from. I created stories about my parents, imagined what they might be like. And now," she looked at Victor through blurred vision, seeing him truly for the first time. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm angry at the time we lost, confused about what's real, but also relieved. Finally, I know." Victor stood slowly and walked toward her, every step measured and careful, as if approaching a wounded bird. "I failed you once, Clara. I let you slip away, and that failure has haunted every day since. But if you'll let me, if you'll give me the chance, I'll spend whatever time I have left making up for those lost years." Clara rose to meet him, her decision made not with her mind, but with a heart that recognized something deeper than memory. The bond that not even 2 decades of separation could break. They embraced tentatively at first, then with growing conviction as the reality of their reunion sank in. Victor held his daughter as she wept for the childhood stolen from them both, for the memories that could never be recovered, for the years of wondering and searching that had shaped them into who they were now. But as they held each other in the quiet of that Chicago penthouse, something began to heal. Not completely, not immediately, but enough to glimpse the possibility of wholeness again. "We can't get back what was taken," Victor said softly, stroking her hair as he had when she was small, "but we can build something new from here." Clara nodded against his shoulder, feeling the safety and belonging she had searched for all her life. The lullaby that had connected them across the void of years now became a bridge to their future together. In the months that followed, Victor made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He stepped back from his business empire, liquidating assets to establish the Clara Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to finding missing children and supporting those who had been trafficked or abandoned. Clara left her teaching position to become the Foundation's Director of Family Reunification, using her own experience to guide other families through the devastating process of loss and the complicated joy of reunion. The first child they helped reunite with her family was a girl who had been taken 3 years earlier, found speaking only a word for word of a bedtime story her mother had taught her. As Clara watched the reunion, she understood that their pain had been transformed into purpose, their loss into a way to prevent others from experiencing the same devastation. The Foundation's headquarters occupied a beautiful building in downtown Chicago, its walls lined with photographs of successful reunions and letters from grateful families. On the opening day, as reporters and supporters gathered to celebrate this new venture, Victor took the podium with Clara beside him. "Sometimes," he said, his voice carrying across the crowd, "life asks us to wait for our miracles. We search, we hope, we grieve, and we continue despite everything. But the waiting teaches us compassion, the searching gives us strength, and the grief makes our joy more precious." Clara squeezed her father's hand, feeling the truth of his words. Behind them, a banner displayed their motto, "Every lost child deserves a lullaby home." As Victor concluded his speech, and the crowd erupted in applause, Clara knew that while they couldn't undo the past, they could transform it into something beautiful and meaningful. The little girl who had been stolen had become a woman strong, enough to help others find their way home. Congratulations, Type 7 in the comments, so I know you stayed with me until the end. Leave a like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. See you.